Hello, everybody. It's Michael Herbage with Mayco Colors, and I want to thank you for joining me for this month's live event. Today, we are going to be talking about the Mayco Ritual Textural Glazes. We have gloop and we have beads, and I'll be showing you samples today, different things that worked out and things that didn't work out. So we're going to get started here, and I want to show you, I'm going to flip the camera down, and I'm going to show you a bunch of different samples that I've created. And sometimes techniques work and sometimes they don't. So I'm going to show you what worked today, and I'm going to show you something that didn't work. So the first product that we're going to talk about is beads. And beads is a textural product. And when it's fired, it wants to bead up. And so the number of coats that you apply will make a difference of the effect that you get. And so this is doing 1 to 2 coats of that product. Where it's real thin, you get a small breakup pattern, and the thicker you go, the more that product wants to bead up and ball. It's basically a glaze that's designed to crawl during the firing process. And so more coats that you put on, and I'll show you some other samples here, the more of a beading effect. Mayco, when they bought Ritual Glaze about a year ago, we announced it in Sika last year, there was a product called Crawl. And we had every intention of coming out with that product. But what we discovered was the bead product actually acts as a crawl. If you do 1 to 2 coats, you get more of an irregular breakup design, where when you do 3 to 5 coats, you get more of a balled up beading design. So it's actually 2 products in one, which is awesome. It comes in 9 different colors, and I'm going to show you some other samples here. This piece I did to show what it looks like. This is just on a piece of Mayco stoneware bisque, so it's a piece of white stoneware. This is 1 coat over the bare bisque. On the top part of the vase, I showed what it looks like with 1 coat over the top of clear glaze. And if you look closely, it has just a little bit of a breakup pattern. And anytime you use bead over the top of a gloss glaze, it will flatten and develop a different texture. And I've got some other really cool pieces to show you here, but I wanted to show kind of the irregular breakup design you get on the bisque when you do that 1 coat, and the effect that you get with 1 coat over a clear glaze. As I turn this is using 2 coats on the bisque. This is using 2 coats on the glaze. And you can see that you get a little bit of kind of a breakup pattern. Texture is not the best surface to use this product on. I don't get as good a result as what I'm going to show you on a flat piece in a minute. This is 3 coats of the bead on the bisque. This is 3 coats on top of clear glaze. And this is 4 coats of the bead on bisque. And look at how much more those beads are larger than 1 coat or even 3 coats. How much larger those beads are when you put on 4 to 5 coats. And then this is what it looks like. And there's not a huge difference between the 2 coats, 3 coats, and 4 coats. Part of this, though, is that the top of this vase is texture. This is what that bisque looks like. And so when you're brushing it on over texture, that product tends to want to kind of get caught down in that texture, and you probably get a heavier application than you do if you're doing it on a smooth surface. So that gives you an idea of 1, 2, 3, 4 coats, the different effects that you can get with that product. This vase is using, instead of using it on bisque, it's using it over the top of engobe. You can use beads over the top of engobes. You can use them over the top of our underglazes, but we recommend pre-firing those underglazes or engobes on the piece. And the reason we suggest that is the bead wants to crawl and pull back in firing. And if that underglaze or engobe isn't fired onto the piece to just like a greenware temperature, like an 04 temperature, it wants to also pull that product back. So pre-firing that on the piece in a greenware load to like an 04 is going to set that color. And then when you use products like bead over the top, it's not going to pull them back. The testing that we did where we didn't pre-fire, when it pulled it back with products like our fundamental underglazes and our engobes, those products are clay or slip based. And so what ended up happening was when that bead pulled back and it pulled back that underglaze, you were pulling back 3 coats of underglaze or engobe, and it was putting kind of sharp edges on your beading effect on the piece. So if you pre-fire it, you don't have to worry about that color pulling back. And on this one, I did variations of 1 coat, 2 coats, 3 coats to show you how you can get that crawl effect with the color, and you can get a nice mixture with the bead effect. So when you apply the color, which I'm going to show in a couple minutes, you don't have to put 2 or 3 coats over the whole thing. You can add coats in some areas to get that different type of beading and crawl effect on your pieces. I want to show this one. This is interesting. This one was done using the orange bead on the bottom and the yellow on the top. There's 3 coats of orange here, 3 coats of yellow on the top. In the middle, what I did is I applied 2 coats of the yellow followed by 2 coats of the orange. And when you look at that, notice how the orange is kind of in the middle of the beading. So whatever color you put down first, when it's fired, it kind of goes like that, and it hugs whatever color is on top. And so on here, I've got yellow on the outside edges and orange in the middle. When you go a lot heavier, you start to get more of a drippy bead effect where those colors want to bead up even more. So application, thickness of your application will make a difference. So this is 3 coats. This is 4 coats because I did 2 coats of the yellow and 2 coats of the orange. The thing with bead is you don't know what you're going to get until it's fired. You can't be specific as far as I want a bead here and a bead there. And that's where Melt Gloop, that I'm going to talk about in a little bit, comes into play. This vase was done over our sparkle black engobe. You can see the sparkle of the background color, and I pre-fired that on rather than using it on the bisque. And look at how bright and vibrant, I mean, the colors are bright and vibrant on just the bisque, but look at how they pop and stand out on top of the black in the background. So you could use underglaze, you could use engobe. And on this one, I kind of created a gradient where I did yellow, I did orange, and you can see where the orange overlapped the yellow because you get that mixture of orange and yellow together. And then as we go up toward the top, the orange was overlapped by the red. And so I get that mix of the red and the orange. And you can see the variables of how thick that color is applied. You'll get different beading effects. This on the top, this is the Melt Gloop, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. This bowl was done, and I did the underside of this. This is our black sparkle engobe, and you can see the sparkle in there. And on the rim of the bowl, on the underside, I just did 2 coats of the bead. You can see areas like this where it probably was only 1 coat, a little bit on the edge. And a lot of people ask, like, does this product run and flow? When you do it on the bisque or you do it over an underglaze or an engobe, that color doesn't flow. It wants to bead up in the area where you apply that color. Now, would I go right up to the very edge on the bottom? Probably not. I would leave a little space there because that color does kind of move and pull. And if you get real heavy application where you get bigger beading like this, sometimes that bead might move a little bit. But generally that product doesn't run and flow when you use it over a product like engobe or underglaze. So the underside, this was 2 coats. And on the top, this is 3 coats on the edge. And you can see the difference in that beading effect from 2 coats to 3 coats. I generally don't go past 5 coats. When I start going past 5 coats, I tend to get really giant beads on there and a lot of blank area. I really like the 2 to 3 coat application, but play around with it and see what effects you get. This bowl, I've had a lot of people ask, what is that combination that you used on the inside of that bowl? And that actually is our amaryllis stoneware glaze It's just 3 coats of that on the inside. It's a crystal glaze, and so you get that movement of the crystals. And if you haven't worked with the crystal glazes, you need to make sure that the crystals that are on the bottom get mixed in. And a lot of times people, when they're applying, they apply 1 coat of glaze, and while they're waiting for that to dry, the crystals can kind of settle a little bit in the bottle. So every time you go back in, you want to make sure that you kind of mix that up. I usually pour some into a cup. I mix it really well, pour some into a small cup so I don't potentially contaminate that whole bottle with a dirty or a wet brush or something getting into the container. And that way, I'm always stirring those crystals back into the mixture. If you use crystal glazes and you find that you have a lot of crystals when you get down halfway through that bottle and that bottom of the jar is really concentrated with crystals, it's probably because you didn't keep it mixed up when you were working with it. So always make sure that you stir or shake this good to get those crystals mixed in between applying your coats of color. If you're not seeing a lot of crystals like this on your pieces when you fire them, it's probably because you're not keeping it mixed, that you're getting a good application of those crystals that will melt and flow in firing. Now, what happens if I apply beads over the top of a gloss glaze? This bowl was done using our sapphire blue stoneware glaze, and I applied 3 coats of that, and then along the top rim, I put 2 coats of white bead and then 1 coat of yellow bead on the top. And you get this really cool crackle cobblestone look with that product. And there's a little bit of texture. So anytime you put beads over a gloss glaze, it tends to flatten out and you get this effect rather than the beading effect that you get when you use it on bisque over a fired on underglaze or a fired on ongoing color. And this is a really cool effect. Now, people ask, is this dinnerware safe if I did this beading inside of this bowl? No, it's not. While the product doesn't have anything toxic in it, the problem with textures like this is if I use this down inside the bowl, food and bacteria could get caught in there. I kind of caution even using it on the edges of bowls like this because food and things can get trapped around that texture and you could get some bacteria in those areas. On a piece like this, even though this has flattened out, there is a little bit of a texture there. And so Mayco doesn't claim that these are dinnerware safe to use on the insides of bowls or cups or anything like that, where food is going to be sitting in there and having contact. But this is a cool effect that you can get, and on the outsides of vases and things, it's a great option, or areas where food isn't going to come into contact. Now, the other day, I wanted to play around with some of our other new products that are considered low fire. So Mayco Stroke and Coat was designed for the low fire market, but we discovered it works great on stoneware as well. Some colors will change a little bit, and on the label there is a special notes section, and it will let you know in that area if the color is going to change in firing. This happens to be a brand new color that we released about a month ago called Speckled Tic Tac Turquoise. And so the Stroke and Coat line has a line of just plain colors that are solid colors, and then there's a line of speckled ones. And so the speckled colors have some specks in them. So I wanted to see on this plate if I did the Speckled Tic Tac Turquoise, and look at that, isn't that an awesome color? And then what would happen if I applied the beads over the top of that? So I just did 2 coats of white bead all around the edge of this plate, right over the top of 3 coats of Speckled Tic Tac Turquoise. So I did 3 coats over the whole thing, applied 2 coats of the white bead along the edge. And generally with the speckled Stroke and Coat colors, most of them, the specks maybe will kind of get a little bit bigger. On a vertical surface, you may see a little bit of movement with those specks. But what I found interesting on here is Stroke and Coat is a very stable color. When you take it at low fire, when you take it up to stoneware temperatures, You get a little bit of fuzzing usually, maybe a little bit of movement on a vertical surface. They don't keep crisp lines like an underglaze will do. But on this piece, I went with the white right down to where that ridge was. And I'm going to grab a pen here and show that that white went to this point and above. So there was a little bit of movement on this vertical surface. And look at the breaks in kind of where it broke apart. It kind of looks like a ice breaking off on an iceberg. Um, and so it did move a little bit down onto that flat surface. I was thinking this would be so cool on something like a Christmas tree or a cone shape. So I want to play around more with this effect. Again, there's a little bit of a texture here in between where those break marks are, but it's not sharp and jagged like a product like our cobblestones are in low fire, or I'm trying to remember the name of our product that's high fire. I know Kaylin will type that in there, but we have a high fire product of that as well. I see that a question came up, is speckled stroke and coat still low fire? So stroke and coat is a low fire glaze, but it also works at higher temperatures, and you can take it all the way up to cone 10. On Mayco's website, we show all of the colors at cone 06. We show them at cone 6 and cone 10. And like I said, on the labels, there's a notes section that will tell you, sometimes it'll say the color lightens, some colors will fade, some will intensify. And so it'll say that on the label, but the best place to look is on our website. In our literature, we also show on our posters, one side shows colors at cone 06 and the other side shows them at cone 6. And in the product guides, one side of the guide has low fire, the other side has at cone 6 as well. So good questions. And Kaylin just reminded me, mud crack. Mud crack is the high fire kind of version of our low fire cobblestone, but it's got more of a texture, more of a dimensional texture when you use that. So I love the look of this. I can't wait to play around a little bit more with this on some other shapes and pieces. Now, I want to show you a piece that didn't turn out because I thought in my head this was going to work, but the only way to find out is to actually try it. And so this piece here, it's hideous. There's nothing. When I opened the kiln and I saw this, I was like, oh, that did not turn out like I thought it was going to. But when I started looking closer at it, and I'm not sure I can get it as well in the camera here, when you start looking at some of these areas, look at that cool coloring and texture that you get around the beads. And so I'm going to play around more with this because I think there's some potential. So sometimes you may have things that don't turn out. And I always say I use that as a learning experience because I might look at it and like this one, I'm looking at it going, okay, there's something cool happening here. I want to explore this some more. And this could turn into a really amazing technique. But I want to tell you what I did on here because in my head, it made sense. So I talked before about how if you don't pre-fire products like fundamentals or engobes onto the surface before you fire the beads, the beads will cause these colors to pull up and lift. So we have a product called Duncan Easy Strokes. This was a product that Duncan had. It's a line of pure pigment underglazes. So unlike the engobes and the fundamentals that are a clay-based product, this is basically a pure pigment. So I thought I can band color on the background of this plate. So I banded kind of a yellow to orange to red easy stroke color on this piece using the poppy orange, the neon yellow, and the passion red. And I thought because these aren't clay-based, when that color pulls, I don't know that it will pull the underglaze up. Well, guess what? I was wrong. And so I did a yellow orange, and on the outside edge of this was actually the passion red. And on the outside edge, I applied the black bead right on top of the passion red, no glaze or anything under it. And what I thought I might get is a beading effect of the black with red showing in the background. Well, what I got in the background was areas where it pulled back to the bare bisque, and areas where the underglaze didn't pull back, it turned kind of brown because that black can kind of stain things that it comes into contact with. But because that underglaze wasn't pre-fired on, it just kind of made a hot mess with that. I'd also applied a little bit of the dark blue on top of the black bead around the edge of this piece, and you can see a little bit of that blue beading on there. But in the middle, I had my yellow and my orange Easy Stroke banded on, and I applied 2 coats of our Stoneware Clear SW001 over the top. And then I applied 2 coats of the dark blue bead in kind of a flower pattern, and I applied black bead in the middle. On top of that blue, once the wet, shiny look was gone, I took a little bit of black Easy Stroke and I kind of painted some little veins coming out from that flower petal with the black Easy Stroke. Well, what happened when it was fired, that pulling action of the bead pulled back the clear glaze, and it also pulled back the Easy Stroke. And then the Easy Stroke that was on top, the black that was on top, kind of marbled into the dark blue bead. The Easy Stroke that's around the edges of all of this beading where it pulled up, guess what? It's not rough and sharp like I got with the fundamentals and the engobes when I didn't pre-fire them on. And the reason being because it's just pigment. It's not clay. So I didn't get those sharp edges. And the camera truly doesn't pick up kind of the depth and dimension that I got with that combination of clear glaze, black Easy Stroke, blue bead, and the clear glaze on there. So what I'm going to try next is I'm going to pre-fire a color in the background, and I may do like the black underglaze or the black engobe, and then I'm going to band my Easy Strokes on, apply my clear glaze, and do my beads on top of that, and do some Easy Stroke on top of that. So when this pulls back the next time, it's going to pull back the Easy Stroke, but in the background, instead of seeing white, I'm going to see black or whatever color I put on the background and pre-fire onto that piece. So I see a lot of potential with this. So when you have pieces that don't turn out, take a really close look at it, and you may find things there that you think you can work with to develop something else. So I'm going to set these products out of the way here. And this was the clear glaze, the SW001. We also have a zinc-free clear glaze that you could use as well. We have certain colors that we recommend using the zinc-free clear with. Now, the next products that I want to talk about is our Melt Gloop. And Melt Gloop is, you know what I'm going to do before I show the Melt Gloop, I'm actually going to show you the application of the beads, and so we don't get this confused. So I've just got a tile here, and a few things that we've learned about the beads is they can be layered, and the direction that you brush the color on makes a difference. And this product is fairly thick. I can take a palette knife and mix all of this in. I try, when I'm done using the color, to kind of go like this and scrape the color in that's on the edge of the bottle and kind of mix it in and leave that in the bottom. If it sits up at the top of the jar, it tends to get a little bit thicker. When you shake it, of course, it's going to get thicker, but this product is thick, but it's fluid and brushable. The Melt Gloop I'm going to show you is really thick. So I'm going to take a little bit of this color. I do like to pour colors out into a cup. I know a lot of people work right from the jar, and I always caution people working from the jar, because even if I take a brush that I have washed out with water and I stick that into this jar, A lot of times there's minerals and things in water that can contaminate that whole bottle and it will cause it to break down the color. And if you ever get a jar glaze that's rock hard on the bottom and water on the top, it's usually that some type of bacteria got in that bottle. So best to pour some in a little cup, pour out as much as you think you're going to need. And I generally don't pour these back into the bottle because, again, this can contaminate the whole bottle of color. So I like to use a soft fan brush. Mayco has a series of fan brushes. They're goat hair. They're really soft and they apply the color really well. When I apply this, I don't want to brush it on like I'm painting a wall. I'm going to brush that on and do a generous coat. If I want that crawl effect, where I get more of this irregular type pattern instead of the beading look, I can do one coat, brush it in one direction. If I want to do a second coat to get a little bit more of a bead or more of a crawl effect, a little bit bigger pieces of irregular shapes, I will wait for that shiny wet look to go away and I will apply a second coat going in the same direction. And that is going to give you more of an irregular breakup pattern rather than a beading pattern. Now, if I want to get the beading effect, I'm going to apply one coat in one direction. And once that wet, shiny look is gone, and this product dries pretty fast, this coat is almost totally dry. My next coat, I'm going to cross hatch and go in the opposite direction. And I'm kind of going back where I have heavy puddles of the color and I just kind of brush that out. If I leave those heavier puddles, it's going to be a thicker application in that area and I'll get more of a large beading effect. Once that second coat is dry, I'm going to go and I'm going to apply my third coat and I'll kind of go at more of an angle with that third coat. And if I want to do a fourth coat, I'll go back and cross hatch in a different direction. And if I do go to a fifth coat, I'll just try to do it either back straight across like this or up and down. So you want to mix that up and you're going to get a better beading effect when you go in different directions. If you want that crawl effect, brush in the same direction, usually at most two coats. Now, everybody has a different thickness of application of coats, so I highly suggest doing a test tile, doing one coat, two coats, three coats, four coats, five coats to see what type of beading effect you're going to get with that. Oh, I see. I missed a question here. Kaylin had asked, somebody had asked a while ago, sorry, about what created the wide gaps in thickness, and it was in relation to this plate here. Somebody asked that question. And so what caused this on there is we got a little bit of movement, and that's where I showed that the color had gone right to this ridge, and you can see we got on this kind of vertical surface a little bit of movement and a little bit of pull that created these wider gaps. So that stroke and coat underneath moved a little bit and it kind of pulled the bead with it on the top. And that's where on a vertical surface, something up and down, you're going to get more probably of that breakup pattern depending on the glaze you use below. Stroke and coat is a pretty stable color, so you don't get a lot of movement when that's taken to stoneware temperatures. But if I do a glaze that's going to run and flow that I know is pretty much every time going to run off of my piece if I get it too thick, it's going to pull the bead with it. So again, do test tiles. Everything that you do a test tile before you do something really big to see how that product reacts with the glazes that you're working with. All right, so again, 1 to 2 coats in the same direction if you want that crawl effect. 3 or more coats cross hatching when you want that bead effect. When I'm doing it over the top of a gloss glaze, I do the cross hatching when I'm doing multiple coats of that color. If I wanted more of a small crawl effect, I would do 1 to 2 coats in one direction on top of those pieces. And that's where on this vase with one coat, you don't get a lot of texture or breakup pattern on top of, and that was just over clear glaze that I used. The light blue, you can see in the crevice here where it's a little bit deeper, I got a little bit more of a breakup pattern on that piece. So as this color dries, you want to use caution because when this sits for a while, you're going to start to see cracks in this glaze. If you put 5 or more coats on, you're going to see a lot more cracks showing up. So don't be alarmed by that. It's normal to see cracks. You might see a little bit in a 2-coat application, but you want to be careful with this because as that product wants to kind of dry and crack and pull a little bit, you can get pieces that might curl up a little bit on there. And so I generally, when I'm working with the beads or the gloop, I try to make sure that I'm going to be able to get these in the kiln right away and get them firing. Because if you have to move these a lot and you have pieces that are kind of lifting a little bit on there, you might knock some of those pieces off getting them to the kiln. The other thing that you can do is you can have just a mister bottle there with clean water and just lightly mist. If you start seeing it lifting up and you're worried that you're not ready to get it into the kiln, just gently mist it with water. You don't want to douse it with water, but gently misting it will dampen that color. We've had people ask, because some of our other products, like our cobblestone, you can apply wax resist over the top of it, and that will kind of protect it, and the wax burns away in firing. The testing that we did with the bead with wax resist did not give us good results. So we don't recommend putting wax over the top to hold that on there. It's best to kind of get it in the kiln or mist it with water if you see that that is starting to crack and pull. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to really put this product on here heavy because I want you to see by the end of this live how the color can crack and pull when you put it on really heavy. So I'm going to set this aside and we will go back to that. Now, if I want to apply, here I did 2 coats and let's pretend I crosshatch that. If I want to apply another color over the top, I've got my orange and I can apply coats of that right over the top of the blue, and that's where I will get that beading effect where you get the 2 colors together. And so you want to make sure, though, that you put these coats on before that color gets really dry and starts to crack. Because once it starts to crack, when it gets to that point of dryness, as you brush over it, you can actually pull pieces off. So make sure that you can be there to apply all of your coats. It doesn't take long for them to dry at all. And Kaylin asked a question about when you say get it in the kiln right away, how fast do you mean? So I've actually put pieces in that are wet into the kiln. When we talk about the gloop, I'm going to talk more about that. Normally, with other glazes, it's recommended that they dry before you put them in the kiln to fire them. But honestly, with the gloop and the bead, you can put them in the kiln wet and start that kiln while those colors are wet. I know that sounds strange, but it honestly does work. Somebody also asked, would latex work? And so latex is, wax resist is basically like wax, and the wax burns away early on in the firing. When it gets to a few hundred degrees, the wax will burn away. Latex is basically like a coating of rubber that you're putting on there. Generally, latex you peel away before you put that in the kiln. So if you put latex on there and tried to peel that away before putting it in the kiln, you would probably be pulling the product, the bead off of the piece. And so, and if you didn't take it off and you fired it, you're basically firing latex rubber in the kiln, and you probably would have some pretty nasty toxic fumes, I would think, from doing that. So I really would not recommend that either. Good question, though. So let's move on to Melt Gloop. And if you guys have questions about beads, feel free to type those in, and Kaylin and Andy will let me know about those questions. So Melt Gloop is a product that creates dripping flowing effects. It will also create dot patterns. What's different about this with the dot patterns is you actually put the Melt Gloop on in dots, and when it's fired, that beads up and that dot basically goes where you put it. Where with beads, you're brushing that over the whole surface and it is going to pull back and crawl and you'll get random bead effects. So if you have something where you want a specific dot somewhere, you can apply the Melt Gloop and you will get a dot where you put it. The heavier you put that on, so these were about pea-size applications, and I'll show you in a minute how we do that. These were heavier applications. So if you put it on heavier than a bead or a pea shape, you will get movement with that color. This was one of the first pieces that I experimented around with. And I also wanted to find out if I put the Melt Gloop along the edge, I get that flowing. I get the dots when I do the pea-size shapes or smaller. You'll get smaller dots with smaller dots of color. But I also wanted to see what would happen if I overlapped a glaze over the top of the Melt Gloop. And if you do that, as the Melt Gloop runs, it actually pulls any color or glaze that you've put over the top of it right with it. So if I put this real heavy, I could get drips going way down the side on the piece, and it would drag some of that glaze with it. On this particular piece, I used just Melt Gloop colors of blue, red, and green on this piece to get these drips, and I'll explain and show that process in a little bit. But once I discovered this, I was like, okay, what can we do next? And so some people in the office started playing around with mixing other colors with them. But before I show you that, I want to show you how thick this product is. When I demonstrate with this at trade shows, I will take this, and in this bottle, I don't have a label on here because when I got this product, it was brand new. We hadn't even bottled it yet, and we literally went to the tank of these colors and filled these containers. So that's why I don't have a label. The ones you'll get, they'll have labels on them. But this is how thick this product is supposed to be. So Melt Gloop, don't be surprised when you open the container. I tell people at shows, I'm like, it's kind of like a Dairy Queen Blizzard. I can flip it upside down like this, and that color's not going to come out of the container. Again, with this product, I should, and I forget sometimes to do this, is scrape the color off of the sides and keep that mix down in, because if they sit up on the sides, it's gonna tend to dry out and you'll get kind of crunchies in there. But this product is very, very thick. You'll get a little bit of movement once you stir it, but generally it's going to be a very thick product. So you want to, before you use it, stir it up, get it mixed well. And we generally apply this product using either a syringe or a Writer bottle. And I played around. I had people asking, could I apply it with a palette knife? Could I apply it with a brush? With a brush, it's really hard because it's such a thick product. But I'm going to show you a few different things. Again, things that worked, things that didn't work. So I tried it with a palette knife, and I got some very interesting, cool effects. But look at all of this kind of staining in the background. So when Melt Gloop is fired, generally on this piece, I loaded up color on the top of this vase, and I had a stack of color that came up like this. And when it was fired, that stack of color melted and ran down the side of the piece. When I did it with a palette knife, and I'll show you in a minute how I did this, and kind of why it works and doesn't work, is when you're using a palette knife to apply this color, I was scooping the color up and I was kind of scraping on. Like here, I scraped on some black, and then I dabbed on some yellow, and I dabbed on some green. But the knife kind of went like this, and it got a real thin application of the color next to where these drips are. So what happens in firing is Melt Gloop, if it's thin, it wants to bead up. And so all these areas where you see this kind of dark staining in the background, that's where when I applied it with the palette knife and I kind of scraped the color off, I got really thin areas. And then when it's fired, it wanted to go like this and pull in, and it kind of left staining there. So if I was going to cover this whole piece with color and have drips everywhere and not see that, I'd be cool with it. If I did, say, a black underglaze or black engobe in the background, maybe I wouldn't see that dark staining and it wouldn't stand out like it does on the bare bisque. That might be okay. So I'm going to play around some more with that. But I wanted to show this, and I'll show how I did it. So if you like this look or you want to play around with it, you can use a palette knife, but that's kind of the risk that you take with using a palette knife to apply it in a technique like this where you put it in real heavy. Now, notice how this color ran to the bottom of the piece. And I'm sure a lot of people are concerned about, and when I'm at shows, people ask about, how do I know how much to apply? How much is it going to run? Well, there's a lot of variables there with it. And again, I suggest doing some vertical test tiles and doing some color application on the pieces and firing those. And that will give you an idea of how thick of an application, because I can put a really tall stack of it on a piece and it will run down to a certain point. But if I do a tall stack that's wider, I'm going to have more movement on there. So you really, there is no, I tell people it might run double the height of what you did, but if your pile is really wide, there's that much more product that can run down. So I wanted to purposely do this one super heavy to show how the color can run off. Now there's different ways to protect your shelf. Kiln wash is one way to protect it, but you will get kiln wash stuck to the bottom of this. In the factory, some people will use, when they know that they're going to have a piece where the color is going to run off, they will put just some loose pieces of fire brick under it, because that fire brick can be broken away and they can sand the bottom on there and get that smooth. A product that I discovered that works really well, it's called Blanket Prop. In the porcelain market, artists will use this on the shelf or to support pieces in a porcelain firing. And this product is similar to like the blanket prop or the blanket that they sell for the insides of like raku kilns. You can buy these by the square foot. If you research porcelain prop or Google search porcelain prop, it comes in thick sheets, it comes in thinner sheets. In the glass market, they use it between glass because it doesn't stick to the glass, and it can be pulled out to make hollow areas for things like chains to get through on cabochons and jewelry and things. So this product is great for this because the color, if it does run off of the piece, it goes onto that surface. It leaves a little bit of a fuzzy residue on here that I can take and wash off. It doesn't stick to the bottom of my piece, and it gives you don't really have to grind a whole lot because most of that will wash away. I do have a couple little sharp edges here that I would sand away, but that is a good option. Some people will do cookies underneath their pieces to protect the shelf, make sure that those are kiln washed as well, but this is a great option with this. I see there's some questions that came in. Do you ever need to add liquid if it dries? So if the Melt Gloop dries up, adding water to dried up glazes will make them a liquid again. Will they necessarily work properly? Not necessarily. And I see a lot of people spend a lot of time reconstituting dried up glazes, and then you can run into issues where the glaze wants to crawl in firing and act like a bead. And most of the time, if you're not expecting that and not using a beaded product, that's not a good outcome on a piece. So yeah, if this dries up, you could add water to it, but there's no guarantee how it's going to react and fire out. If it does dry up, add water. If the color is too thick, you can add water. But remember, Melt Gloop is supposed to be thick. This is like spackling compound is kind of how I would say that this is. Thicker than peanut butter, thicker than toothpaste. That is the consistency that it should be, where the beads should be more brushable. And so If you're going to add water to a product, if you've got a glaze that's thick and you want to add water to it, and you're not going to use that whole bottle of glaze up on that piece, I recommend using distilled water. If you use well water or city water in there, you run the risk, again, of breaking down that color. If I'm going to use all the color up in that sitting, I can use well water, city water, and it should be fine. But if I'm not going to use it up, distilled water is the best option. Now, you'll see people talking about adding gum solutions. I've had people tell me that they add sodium silicate, they add Darvan to glazes. You're at that point really changing the chemical makeup of that glaze. And while it may work with some colors, it doesn't work with all colors. And I've had conversations with our 3 different guys that work in our lab that develop our colors and do all the testing about people adding some of these things, and they kind of get this cringed look on their face and they're like, yeah, that might work with some colors, but it doesn't necessarily work across the board. So talk to the color company to see before you start adding stuff. I've had people say they add bleach to glazes that have an unpleasant odor. I mean, you're really changing the chemical makeup. So talk to the glaze manufacturer about the specific colors. But if you're going to spend an hour to reconstitute something, I kind of question if it's worth my time. My time is more valuable for that. So good question, though. All right. So product is very thick, and I want to show you some samples, some other samples here of things that we played around with. So in the office, one of our artists tried mixing some Jungle Gems, which is a low fire crystal glaze, with the Melt Gloop. And so she mixed 50-50 Jungle Gem with the white Melt Gloop. And so I did this vase, and this one was taking Fruity Freckles, which is CG981, and this crystal glaze, the colors come out really nice at cone 6. And so that's why I chose this one. Some of the Jungle Gems, some of the colors disappear. They generally become more fluid when you do Jungle Gems up to cone 6. Again, on the label, it will have special notes of what happens. But on this one, I mixed 50-50 white Melt Gloop with this Jungle Gem. And what I did is I applied this, and this makes it that it's brushable. So then I took my fan brush and I loaded it up with the color that I mixed in the condiment cup, and I kind of laid it on like this, and I kind of had these rounded areas. Well, because the Jungle Gem creates more movement and more flow, it created movement and flow with the Melt Gloop. And you can see the drips that I got and the flowing effect that I got. On the background, I've got, again, the Sparkle Black engobe, which generally kind of slows down the movement of color a little bit. But look at the cool colors that I got in there with the Jungle Gem mixed in, and this was 50-50 Jungle Gem with the Melt Gloop. But also look at the thickness of the drip edge that I got with that as well. So it's almost like a thickener for glazes if you want more of a dimensional effect with that on the piece. And on a vertical piece, you're going to get more movement, obviously, than you will on a horizontal piece. So that was using a low fire Jungle Gem. Then I wanted to see, well, what would happen if I used a stoneware Jungle Gem? And so I grabbed my amaryllis that I showed before, and I had here on the table, and I don't know where it, here it is. Okay, this is the amaryllis, the SW192, mixed 50-50 with the white Melt Gloop. And look at the cool edge that I got. And I did not get as much of a flowing drip as I did with the Jungle Gem, because the Jungle Gems become much more fluid when they're taken to higher temperatures, where the amaryllis is a stoneware glaze, and there is some movement with that glaze, but it doesn't move like the Jungle Gems do. And so I got a very heavy drip. And these, I pretty much did the same thing. I just kind of loaded the color on and puddled it in those areas. So it basically had this pattern. And then I got a little bit of a flow because this drip started just below the texture line of this. And so this maybe came down this far and then I got that much more movement. But look at the crystals showing up in there. And this whole piece was covered with a black engobe. I wanted to see if the black would come through it all, and it did in some of the areas where the color moved and flowed, and I got a little bit along the top edge of that piece. So you can mix low fire jungle gems with it. You can mix stoneware colors with it. And then this mug that I have, this one, I wanted to play around with another new color of Stroke and Coat, Speckled Cutie Pie Coral. And this one I mixed 50-50 Cutie Pie Coral with the white Melt Gloop. And I applied that over, again, the Sparkle Black engobe. And I created little wavy drips on here as well. Stroke and Coat is a really stable color that doesn't move at low fire temperatures. And at high fire temperatures, you get a little bit of movement. So you'll see areas here that are lighter, more of a peachy color. Those are the mixture of the 50-50 Cutie Pie Coral with the white Melt Gloop. And because the Melt Gloop is white, it of course lightens this color. And so that's why you're seeing some areas that have kind of the peachy color. And then I went around and I applied, and I'm just going to squeeze out a little bit of color here to show you where the Stroke and Coat came to on top of the Melt Gloop. So I just went around and kind of applied it like this. The drip that was created was the Melt Gloop movement, and it pulled that Stroke and Coat right down with it, exposing just a few areas of that mixture where you get that lighter color. But a lot of times people want this really drippy, thick look with glazes, and they can't achieve that. And that's where you can mix your glazes with Melt Gloop to create that flowing effect. And then on the inside, I just did that all with 3 coats of Cutie Pie Coral on the inside, and I did 2 to 3 coats of the Cutie Pie Coral on top of the Melt Gloop. The Melt Gloop was from here down, and I had just brushed that on because it makes it very brushable, and I did real heavy edges of that product and then kind of brushed it in so I didn't have a big ridge up here, and then that color just kind of moves and flows. So if you're looking for that really drippy look on your pieces, mix some of your colors with them as well. All right. I don't see any other questions yet at this point, so I'm going to show you guys kind of how the Melt Gloop is applied. And I'm going to pull out the black here. And I've got the white, and so I'm going to take a little bit of the white, and I'm going to scoop some of that out into a cup. And this is where I can mix a color with it, whether it's a jungle gem or a crystal glaze. And I'm going to actually mix some of just the Cutie Pie Coral with this because it's going to show up the best in this cup. And so I'm going to put about the same amount of Cutie Pie Coral. Now I could do less Cutie Pie Coral in this container, and it wouldn't be as deep of a color. So you don't have to do 50%. We don't recommend going much past 50% because then you have more Stroke and Coat or more jungle gem or more crystal glaze in the color than you do the Melt Gloop. And so you won't get as dramatic of a thick application of that color. And so I'm going to grab a tile here and just show if I want that heavy ridge of color, I'm going to take and scoop up this product, and I'm going to lay this on the piece and put a really nice high edge and have it kind of taper in. And I can always go back and I can add more. If I want a thicker ridge on there, I can apply even more. And then I kind of taper this back a little bit so I don't have a ridge along the top. And then I would go back and I would apply my other glaze over the top of this. And this is kind of how I did it with the Cutie Pie Coral on that mug. So the The mixture was out on the edge. The cutie pie coral was on top, and I applied 2 to 3 coats of that color right on top of that. And then this was, oops, this was the effect that I got. So a little bit of that mixture showed up, but most of it was the cutie pie coral, but gave me those really heavy drips on that surface. So mixing glazes with them make them very brushable and easy to use that way. If I'm just going to apply Melt Gloop by itself, that's where the syringe or the Writer bottle works best. And so these syringes, you can get these, a lot of the pottery suppliers are carrying these. There's no sharp needle on them. They're just a plastic tip. Some of them have a little cover that will fit over the top of that, which is handy because if you load this with color and you don't use all of it, you just put that color on to prevent that from drying out. But when I use the syringe, I want to have this all the way down. I want to make sure that my color is mixed well. And then I'm going to take the syringe and stick it right down into that color. And as I pull back on the plunger, I want to move this around in the container because if I just pull back, it's kind of like drinking a shake. You know how you get a really thick shake and you're sucking it through the straw, and all of a sudden you have like an air pocket in there and you're not getting any shake, and it makes that nasty sound that your parents always told you to stop doing when you were little. So I want to move it around so that I don't get an air pocket, and I kind of pull that plunger back slowly as I move this in the color so that I get this loaded with color, and then I'm going to scrape off the excess. Now you're probably saying, didn't you say before not to dip your brush into the container? This is a risk that you do take with this technique. I could take and pour this into another container, but it honestly works best to do it right in the bottle. But try not to have any water or anything on that syringe. If you end up, rinsing one out, make sure that it's dry really well before you put that back into the container. Now, if I want to do dots of color, I can just take that syringe and I can apply dots. I can do small dots. I can do bigger dots up to about pea size. You'll see a little bit of a ridge on these, and they might not be completely rounded. Don't worry, when those are fired, they want to bead up. That product naturally beads up. Now, if I put a really big bead like this on a vertical surface, when it's fired, it's going to run down on the piece. If I'm doing it on something like this container, so this effect that I got on this one, this was taking this product and kind of going back and forth on the edge of this piece. So some of the color goes to the outside, some of it goes to the inside. If you just do it on the outside, if I just do a big glob of this sticking out on the side of this piece, sometimes it will work, but sometimes that piece can easily get knocked off. So if you want that flowing drip down the side and you're going from the top, it's best to load this color up over the edge so there's a little bit on the inside and a little bit on the outside. I can take a syringe with another color and I'll take and do the white. This is already mixed up. I'm putting the syringe in, pulling it back, moving it around so I don't get air pockets. And I'm just going to grab a little bit of this color. I don't need a lot for this demonstration. And I can take and build this right up on top of that black. I don't have to be real particular about this, but again, I want to go on the inside and the outside. And I will continue to build this up. Sometimes I'll give it a minute or two to kind of set up and dry a little bit, because if I just keep stacking it up while the color is really wet, it could topple over. If I want to, on my bead designs, I can take and add some white to the top of those, and you'll get a combination of a white and black bead when that is fired. I've tried doing things like, I thought, oh, I could write a name and have a dimensional name. This product wants to bead up. So if I do a straight line or something like a name or some lettering, that is going to bead up and you're not going to have a straight line. So, but you know what? A lot of times I have to try it to see what happens, and that's exactly what I did, and the piece looked awful. I tried doing like design work, like flowers and things with this, and wherever that product is thin, it wants to kind of bead up and pull and get to a certain thickness. I'm going to go back to this vase now. If I did this with a palette knife, and I want to show you on the side of this vase, what I did when I did the palette knife is I really loaded that palette knife up and I took and dabbed the color on. And this is where I get kind of a thinner application of that color. That's where then it wants to pull and bead up and I get kind of that staining in the background. So I could take this product and really load this up on this piece, and where I get fine little lines, those fine little lines are going to want to bead up. You're not going to have fine lines when that's fired. So I can go like this and I can really load this up with Melt Gloop, and I can layer colors on top of this. Take a little bit of my white, kind of drizzle some of that on top. And this is where I'll get kind of that marbleizing effect where the colors will run and flow together. So you can have a lot of fun with this product. Again, if you use the palette knife, I recommend using a dark color in the background, pre-firing a color on the background so the staining doesn't show up like you get on the white, or use the syringe to apply that color at the top. I can also use that syringe to apply big globs like this randomly on the vase. And because I don't have thin areas like I get with the palette knife when I pull the palette knife off, I generally won't get that staining because I don't have the thin areas around those big globs. But this is where, when I have it like this, I can put it in the kiln this wet and I can fire this and the colors come out beautiful and amazing. Normally we don't recommend sticking wet colors in the kiln, but with the Melt Gloop, you can do that. This was a piece I experimented with to see combining bead. I did the light blue 2 coats on the bottom and 2 coats of the dark blue, and I got that beading effect where I got the dark and the light together. On the top, I took and put a heavy application of the white Melt Gloop right along the edge where the texture ended, knowing that it would run over the blue beads. And then on top of that, I put rose quartz stoneware glaze, SW198, and that kind of overlapped the white Melt Gloop. And you can see that that rose quartz then pulled down and it kind of mixed in. You got kind of a marbleizing with the blues as well, where it went over the top. And then on the top of that, I put some globs of more white Melt Gloop. And when that goes over the top of a gloss glaze, it flattens out just like the beads do. It's not as dimensional, and it will move a little bit with that color. And then I put some more rose quartz up on the top of this piece, and so that kind of went down over the top of that. So there's kind of some cool, interesting effects that you can get by layering with glazes, and that's where that very first piece that I did, this one here, when I discovered glaze that overlaps Melt Gloop will flow with the Melt Gloop. So Jim asked, is that applied directly to bisque? Can you put it on top of an underglaze? I'm not sure at what point that came in at 1043. So we were probably talking about Melt Gloop. Good question. So Melt Gloop can go over the top of an underglaze, and it can go over the top of an engobe. When you don't pre-fire an underglaze or an engobe on for beads or for Melt Gloop, you do kind of risk that product, the beads especially, pulling back that underglaze or that engobe. If it is if you're using Melt Gloop, the Melt Gloop tends to run, but those little beads that you put on can also, we've seen cases where it kind of pulls the underglaze or the engobe up if you don't pre-fire it. So with both products, we recommend pre-firing underglazes or engobes onto the surface to just like an 04, a greenware temperature, before you apply these products, because you can get some pulling from that. Can you repeat the name of the porcelain to protect the kiln shelf? So this product it's called, you'll find it as porcelain prop. I did a Google search of porcelain prop and it came up with several suppliers. A lot of porcelain artists use this product to prop under pieces. It comes in different thicknesses of sheet form. In the glass market, they also sell it in really thin sheets, and they come in like square foot, or you can get a roll of it, and that is used with like glass. They put it between glass so that when the glass is fused together, that fiber then can be pulled out and you have a hollow opening. So where they want to put like a chain or something through. So there's different thicknesses of that. Avoid fire paper. I had people ask if fire paper would work to protect the shelf. And fire paper is actually a thin paper that's used in the glass market to prevent glass from sticking to the kiln shelf. And it also leaves a smooth surface on glass, where kiln wash or glass separator can leave a little bit of a texture. The fire paper didn't hold up real well when I was taking it up to stoneware temperatures, and that paper also turns to a powder, and you have to wear a mask when you're working with that. I do recommend with this material wearing gloves when you're handling that. It doesn't hurt to wear a mask as well, because it's kind of like cotton candy, or almost like fiberglass type material. So always overprotect yourself rather than being careless if there's anything that you're afraid you're going to be breathing in, or your hands are going to get itchy like you would get from insulation. That same material is also used for like lining the insides of raku kilns. So a lot of suppliers have that product. Question from Pam: is this done with one firing? That I'm based on the time of that question, that should be with the Melt Gloop. And so the Melt Gloop is all the layering that I do is all done in one firing, but if you pre-fire underglaze on, that would give you two different firings then. What temp and hold are you doing? So generally when I fire my stoneware pieces, I do a medium speed up to cone 6, and I don't do a hold. Now, does that mean you shouldn't do a hold on your kiln? Every kiln is a little bit different. And so some people find that if they're not getting really good results, or that people are saying, oh, that looks under fired, sometimes they'll do a little bit of a hold on their firing. And so that every kiln is going to be different. I generally don't need to on my kiln. I make sure my thermocouples are good. I make sure my elements are good. And I use test cones in the kiln to make sure that I'm getting accurate firings. When I start seeing the cones not bending properly, then I take a look at my kiln and figure out what's going on there. If I need to change a thermocouple, usually is what it comes down to. So that really, as far as a hold, it's up to you. Do test tiles, see what happens, and you can adjust and do holds from there. Can I mix Melt Gloop with anything? Yeah, so that if you go back and you rewatch the recording, we do have Melt Gloop that I show mixing it with things like Jungle Gems and Stroke and Coat. I wouldn't mix it with things like underglazes, like the Fundamental Underglazes Designer Liner, because those are clay-based. I believe you could tint them with Easy Strokes. I showed how I did Easy Stroke over the top of bead and the effect that I got, and it wasn't sharp on the edges. So I think Easy Stroke, and that's something I'm going to play around more with. I don't see any other questions. If other questions come in, we'll try to come back to this and answer those questions, typing in the responses. Thank you guys for joining us. I want to let you know we've got the dates set for April and May. I've got a busy travel schedule both of those months, but we're going to be going live on April 13th at 11 o'clock Eastern Time, and on May 18th at 11 o'clock Eastern Time. And we'll get information out there about what we'll be covering during those live sessions as well. So I look forward to seeing some of you at NCECA this next week, and some of you at other events that we'll be traveling to. So take care, and thanks again for joining us.